Sometimes the people meant to bless us are the first to break us. And on that blazing Sunday morning in Dustwell, Texas, Clara Mee learned just how cruel salvation could sound when it came wrapped in laughter. The church bell rang high and hollow, swinging like judgment in the dry wind. Dust rose from wagon wheels, settling over the women's skirts as they whispered behind their gloves. She stood outside the chapel doors, fingers trembling around the bouquet she'd picked herself, wild daisies tied with faded ribbon. The lace on her homemade gown strained at the seams, each thread holding the weight of her hope. Inside, the choir hummed a hymn that sounded like mercy, but mercy didn't live here. Not today. She caught her reflection in the church window, round cheeks flushed from heat, eyes swollen from a night without sleep. Her heart begged for quiet, but the murmurs grew. "She's really wearing white," someone whispered. "Poor thing, that dress is fightin' for its life." Her mother's voice flickered in memory. "Stand tall, Clara Mee. The Lord don't make mistakes." But the Lord didn't have to face these eyes, this crowd, this heat. She stepped forward anyway. The wooden door groaned as it opened, letting the light spill into the church. Rows of faces turned, some startled, some smirking, all watching. The groom, James Porter, stood at the altar. His suit was crisp, his posture proud, but the color had drained from his face the moment she entered. He didn't move, didn't smile, just swallowed hard and stared past her, like she was a stranger who'd wandered into his dream. The minister's wife leaned to another woman, whispering loud enough for heaven to hear. "She can't even fit in the pew." And laughter rippled, low, sharp, like snakes in the grass. Clara's throat burned, her steps slowed. James shifted, looked at his mother, and she gave him that cold little nod, the kind that kills things softly. "James," Clara whispered, "why won't you look at me?" He took a breath, but no words came. His mother stepped forward instead, her perfume thick, her tone dripping with pity that cut deeper than hate. "Child," she said, "you should have known this wasn't meant to be. My son's been pressured enough. We can't have this." The word hung there, this. Not her name, not her heart, just a shape they all saw and mocked. Something inside Clara cracked. A single tear slipped down, tracing the line of her trembling lip. She turned toward the door, holding what little pride she had left like a lantern, flickering in the wind. Her bouquet slipped from her hands. The daisies hit the floor, scattering under polished shoes. No one bent to help her pick them up. Outside, the sun hit her hard. The air tasted like salt and dust. She tore off her veil. It caught on her hair and ripped, fluttering to the ground like a wounded bird. Barefoot now, she walked down the steps, each step heavier than the last, each breath a battle to keep from breaking apart. Children stared, women looked away. A man spat in the dirt, muttering, "Shameful sight." She didn't answer, couldn't. Her heart was too full of noise. The church bell rang again, mocking, hollow, final. By the hitching post, her father's old cart waited, the one she'd decorated with ribbons thinking she'd leave as a bride. Now the ribbons hung limp, coated in dust. She stopped behind it, shoulders shaking, the world spinning in waves of heat. The sound of her own sobs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. Her fingers pressed into the dirt, the grit cutting her skin. "Lord," she whispered, "if you can see me, just make it stop, please." Hoofbeats answered. Slow, steady. She looked up through tears, the sun blurring everything but a silhouette, broad shoulders, hat brim low, a shadow against the glare. The rider stopped his horse a few feet away. He didn't speak, just watched. Clara turned her face away, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Don't look at me," she choked out. "Please, don't." The man's voice came low, rough as gravel but quiet, like a mercy whispered too late. "I ain't here to look, just making sure you ain't hurt." She didn't answer. The wind tugged at the torn veil near her feet, sending it drifting toward him. He caught it before it hit the dust, folded it once, and set it on the fence post. For a moment, their eyes met, hers red with shame, his unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. He tipped it once, slow, then turned his horse and rode off down the road, leaving only the soft thud of hooves and a swirl of dust that glowed like gold in the light. She watched him go, the silence swallowing her whole. Something about that moment, his stillness, his quiet, didn't feel like pity. It felt like recognition, the laughter from inside the church carried out again. She stood, gathering what little strength was left in her bones, and walked toward the edge of town. Each step away from that church felt like a small rebellion. Each tear that dried on her cheek felt like a scar sealing over. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care, only that she'd never come back. And as the sun sank low behind the steeple, painting the sky with the color of endings, she whispered to herself, "They can keep their mercy." The wind rose, carrying dust and silence and something else, something that almost felt like promise. The road beyond Dustwell was long and cruel, carved through fields that hadn't seen rain in weeks. Clara's feet burned against the dirt, her wedding hymn dragging behind her like the ghost of a dream. Every sound, the chirp of grasshoppers, the far-off bark of a dog, echoed louder than her own thoughts. By the time the town vanished behind her, the lace of her gown was streaked with brown, her bouquet just a memory pressed into her palm. She didn't stop until the last church bell faded into the distance. Only then did she crumble against a fence post, chest heaving, heart raw. A wagon rattled past, its driver glancing once before turning his eyes away. Nobody wanted to help a broken bride, not out here. Not when shame rode beside her like a shadow. She whispered, half to herself, half to the wind, "Maybe I deserved it. Maybe they were right." The wind didn't answer. It just moved through the dry grass like breath through an old hymn. As the afternoon wore down, she followed the wagon tracks, not knowing where they led. Her throat ached for water. Her mind replayed the laughter, the snickers, the whispers, the sound of her name twisted into a joke. She tried to remember James's face when he looked at her, but all she saw was the moment his eyes dropped to the floor. That silence had said more than any words could. By dusk, the sky was bruised purple, the kind that turns the world to shadow. She found a cluster of mesquite trees and sank beneath them. Her hands shook as she tore off the last of her gloves, staring at her fingers, blistered, red, trembling. "I was supposed to be a wife," she murmured. Supposed to belong somewhere. The words came out broken. When she lifted her gaze, she saw a figure on the ridge, still as stone, the same rider from before, hat low, horse standing quiet, both framed by the dying light. He didn't move closer, didn't call out, just watched a moment longer, then turned and disappeared behind the hill. She didn't know why, but his stillness stayed with her long after the dark fell. It made the world feel less empty. The night grew cold, crickets sang. She pulled her torn shawl around her shoulders and closed her eyes, the dust settling in her hair. Sleep came slow, thin and shallow, like a mercy she hadn't earned. In her dream, she was standing at the altar again, but this time no one laughed. The church was empty, quiet, the light soft through the windows. When she looked up, it wasn't James waiting. It was that same cowboy, his eyes steady, no judgment in them, just a kind of weary knowing. She woke with a start. The dawn was pale gray, the kind that promises nothing. Her stomach growled, a sharp reminder of how far she'd fallen from the table she'd once imagined herself sitting at. She tore a piece of lace from her dress, used it to tie her hair back, and started walking again. The road bent toward the river crossing. The bridge was old, planks loose, the kind of place travelers hurried through. She didn't hurry. Every step creaked like it might give way, but she kept moving, her eyes on the rising sun. Halfway across, she stopped. The water below shimmered gold and brown, carrying away bits of driftwood and weeds. For a long moment, she just watched it, thinking how easy it would be to let go, to let the current decide what she became next. Then she heard hoofbeats again, slow, measured, The sound carried through the still morning like a heartbeat. When she turned, he was there'ly Carter, though she didn't yet know his name. Same storm, colored eyes, same quiet presence. "You walkin' somewhere particular?" His voice was low, not unkind. She shook her head, just away. He studied her a moment, eyes scanning the torn dress, the bare feet. "Town do this to you?" She met his gaze, chin trembling. "They did what they've always done, just louder this time." He nodded once, like he understood more than he said. "Take this," he said, reaching down with a canteen. She hesitated before taking it. The metal was cool, the water sweeter than anything she'd ever tasted. "Thank you," she whispered. He tipped his hat slightly. "World's rough on folks who don't fit its picture. Don't mean you did wrong." The words hit harder than she expected. For a second, she almost spoke, almost told him everything. But instead, she just looked at the horizon. "Where are you headed?" she asked softly. "West," he said. "Got a ranch near Willow Creek." The silence stretched. Wind brushed against the bridge, the boards creaking beneath them. Finally, he said, "You best find shade before that sun gets mean. There's a trail stop 2 miles on. They'll have water, maybe bread. Follow the tracks." He turned his horse, gave her one last look. "You'll be all right, miss." She wanted to believe him. He rode off again, dust curling behind him. Clara stood there long after he was gone, the sound of his horse fading into the hum of the morning. When she finally moved, her steps felt steadier, though she didn't know why. Maybe it was the kindness in his voice. Maybe it was just the fact that someone, anyone, had spoken to her without looking away. The world hadn't changed, but something in her had. A spark too small to name. By the time she reached the trail stop, her dress was dry, her eyes clearer. The innkeeper didn't ask questions, just handed her a crust of bread and pointed toward the back shed where travelers sometimes rested. Clara sat there as the wind stirred the dust around her boots. She thought of her mother's voice again, of the quiet man with storm-colored eyes, of the church she'd left behind like a burned bridge. She whispered, maybe leaving's the only way to start again. The horizon shimmered in heat. Somewhere beyond it, a road led west, a road toward something she couldn't yet name. The wind carried the faintest scent of rain, far off but coming. She smiled through the ache, picked up her torn skirt, and began walking toward it. Sometimes the road away from pain feels longer than the life that caused it. Clara Mee had walked 2 days past Dustwell before the world began to blur into open nothing, the kind of nothing that forces you to listen to your own heart. The wagon she'd found was old, pulled by a mule that coughed more than it walked. The driver, a kind-eyed widow named Mrs. Finch, had offered her a place on the back bench. Clara hadn't said much, just nodded, climbed aboard, and kept her eyes on the horizon. They rattled westward through the dry country, the wheels humming a steady rhythm against the dirt road. The sun burned everything gold and raw. Sometimes Mrs. Finch would hum an old hymn. Sometimes she'd just sigh and say, "Ain't nothin' out here but sky and memory." Clara didn't mind the quiet. It gave her room to breathe again. Each mile pulled her further from the church doors, further from the laughter that still echoed in her bones. When night came, they stopped near a broken fence line. Mrs. Finch made a small fire, and Clara offered to gather twigs. Her hands were raw, her dress still torn, but the work felt good, like penance and purpose in one. "Where you headed, child?" Mrs. Finch asked, her face soft in the firelight. Clara shrugged, staring into the flames. "Anywhere that don't remember me." Mrs. Finch nodded slow. "The West's full of forgettin', if that's what you're after, but it's got a way of makin' you remember who you really are too." Clara looked up. "And who's that?" The old woman smiled, toothless but kind. "Ain't my place to tell you. You'll know when the land stops fightin' you." The words settled deep. Clara didn't sleep much that night. The stars were too bright, the silence too honest. Every time she closed her eyes, She saw the church doors swing open again, heard the laughter, but then, like a counterweight, she saw another image. The cowboy's eyes, steady and wordless, watching her not with pity, but something harder to name. By dawn the wind had changed, the smell of rain clung to it, faint but real. They rolled onward, the wheels creaking over a stretch of open prairie. The sky darkened without warning, clouds gathering like bruises across the horizon. Mrs. Finch looked up, frowning. Storms common. Ain't seen one move that quick in years. The first thunderclap cracked through the air. The mule brayed, nervous. Clara gripped the wagon rail. Can it hold through? Not this one. We'll have to stop ahead by the trade post, if we can make it. But they didn't. The wind hit like a wall. Dust whipped through the air, turning the day into a blur of brown and grit. Clara held her shawl over her face, coughing. The wagon lurched. One of the rear wheels snapped against a rock, the axle splintering with a sharp cry of wood. The whole cart tilted. Mrs. Finch shouted, pulling on the reins. The mule stumbled, braying loud before the harness gave way. "Get clear, girl," the widow cried. Clara jumped down, landing hard. Her knees struck dirt. The wind howled around her, tearing the bonnet clean off her head. She tried to gather her small trunk, the only thing she'd carried from home, but a sudden gust flung it open. Clothes scattered into the wind. Her mother's shawl, the small Bible, the ribbon she'd once tied in her hair for the wedding. Pages fluttered like lost wings across the road. She ran after them, heart hammering, hair whipping across her face. "No, please, no," she caught the ribbon, the fabric wet with sudden rain. The next flash of lightning showed her reflection in a puddle, mud, streaked while, dyed desperate, she hardly recognized herself. Then hoof beats, close, heavy, a voice cut through the storm. "You're gonna get yourself killed out here." She spun around, it was him, the cowboy from the church road, the same storm. Colored eyes, now shadowed by rain. He dismounted before she could speak, his coat flaring in the wind. Without a word, he crouched, helping gather her scattered things. The rain pounded harder. They worked side by side in silence, the storm swallowing everything but their breath. When they finally reached the wagon, Mrs. Finch was clutching her shawl, shouting over the thunder, "Axle's gone clean. We can't move it." The cowboy looked at Clara, then at the broken wheel. His jaw tightened. "My ranch ain't far. 2 hours ride if the creek don't flood. You can't stay out here." Clara hesitated. "I don't even know your name." "Illy," he said simply, "Illy Carter." He extended a hand, rain running down his sleeve. "Come on. No woman should be left on the road alone." The way he said it wasn't a gesture of charity. It was a statement, a truth. Clara glanced at Mrs. Finch, who nodded weakly. "Go, child. I'll be fine here till the storm eases. You ride on with him." Illy led her to his horse, a tall chestnut mare slick with rain. He swung up first, then offered his arm. She froze for just a second, looking at the broadness of his shoulders, the steadiness in his eyes. Then she took his hand and climbed up behind him. The warmth of him was startling. His coat smelled of leather and rain. He nudged the horse forward, and they rode. The road blurred beneath the downpour, thunder shaking the earth. Clara clung to him, not out of trust yet, but survival. No one spoke. The storm did all the talking. When they reached the high ridge, Illy slowed. The rain softened to a whisper, the clouds breaking just enough for the horizon to bleed orange with dying light. Below them stretched the valley, green patches and worn fences. A lonely house standing against the emptiness. "That your place?" Clara asked softly. Illy nodded, for now. Something in his tone made her look up at him. There was no pride in his voice, just weariness. They rode on in silence. The world smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. By the time they reached the gate, the storm had settled into mist. Illy dismounted, tied the horse, and turned to her. "You'll rest here tonight," he said, Barn's dry, house too, if you don't mind ghosts. She blinked. Ghosts. He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Don't worry, they don't bother me much anymore. Clara followed him through the creaking gate. The wind had died, but the sound of dripping water filled the silence between them. In the distance, a single lamp flickered through the window of that lonely house. She didn't know it yet, but this was where her broken road ended and her redemption began. The morning broke gray and cruel, as if the sky itself carried dust in its lungs. Clara Mee awoke to the sound of the wind slapping at the boards of the shack. Her throat ached, her lips dry and cracked. The fire had long gone cold, and the air bit at her skin like spiteful fingers. She pushed herself up, wincing as her muscles protested. Every inch of her body reminded her she had walked all night, through mud, through tears, through shame. Her dress, once white, was now a ghost of fabric, torn at the hem, stiff with dirt, the lace shredded like her heart. She found a tin cup on the shelf and shook it empty. Her stomach rumbled, the sound low and hollow. Not today, she muttered, forcing her trembling hands to still. You'll live, you always do. She stepped outside. The morning light stretched across the plain, wide and merciless. The world seemed too big for one woman. Too empty, but the wind carried a faint sound, cows lowing in the distance, and that meant water, people, life. She took her shawl, wrapped it tight, and began walking again. Each step crunched over frost and broken twigs. The prairie stretched far and endless. Time moved slow out here, like it was watching to see if she'd quit. Her feet blistered through the thin soles of her shoes. Her vision blurred with hunger and heat. But she kept moving, because stopping meant remembering, and remembering hurt worse than the ache in her bones. Hours passed before she saw it. A ranch gate up ahead, weathered wood with a single word burned into the sign, Hawthorne. A windmill creaked behind the main house, spinning lazy circles against the sky. A few horses grazed near the corral. It looked peaceful, too peaceful for someone like her to step into. She hesitated. What would they see? A runaway? A broken promise in a torn dress? She took a breath. Just water. She told herself, just a drink, then you move on. The gate squealed as she pushed it open. The sound made the cattle stir and a dog bark somewhere near the barn. A moment later, a man's voice followed, low, commanding, "Easy there, Duke, quiet." She froze. The voice was familiar. From around the barn came the rider from yesterday. The same hat, the same stillness in his walk. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, dust clinging to his forearms. He stopped when he saw her. For a long moment neither spoke. Clara's throat tightened. She tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. I didn't mean to trespass. I just needed water." The man studied her, his eyes, gray as a winter morning, softened just enough to be noticed. "You look about ready to fall over." He said finally, "Come on." He walked past her, toward the well near the side of the house. Without a word, he drew up a bucket, dipped a ladle, and handed it to her. She stared at it, then at him, afraid to take it. "You think I poisoned it?" he asked, voice flat but not unkind. She shook her head quickly and drank. The water hit her stomach like mercy, cold, clean, undeserved. When she finished, he filled it again and handed it back. "You alone?" "Yes, sir." "You got people in town?" She looked down. "Not anymore." He nodded once, slow. "Then you best sit a spell before you fall face, first in the dirt." She hesitated but obeyed, sitting on the edge of the well's wooden rim. He didn't press her with questions, just stood a few feet away, watching the horizon as if listening to something only he could hear. After a while, she found the courage to speak. "You're Mr. Hawthorne." He didn't look at her. "Illy Hawthorne. Folks just call me Illy." She nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Illy, for the water." He finally turned toward her. "You from the church up north?" Her heart stopped. "How'd you know?" He shrugged. "Heard the gossip float down this way last night. Town folks got sharp tongues, and the wind carries words faster than sense." Clara's face flushed with shame. She turned away. Then you know what they said. He studied her again. I know what they said. Don't mean I believe it. The words hit her harder than she expected. Her chest tightened, not from pain this time, but from something she hadn't felt in days. Relief. She looked up at him, eyes wet again. Why are you being kind to me? Illy's jaw tightened, a muscle flickering. Ain't kindness, he said quietly. Just right thing to do. World's already cruel enough without me adding to it. The dog trotted over then, big, gray, loyal eyes, and laid his head on Clara's lap. She hesitated, then stroked its fur. The dog leaned closer, tail thumping once. Illy turned away, pretending not to notice the small smile that flickered across her face. Got a spare cot in the barn, he said finally. You can rest there tonight. Tomorrow, we'll see what's next. She blinked. You don't even know me. Don't need to, he said, walking back toward the corral. You look like someone who's been hurt enough. That's all I need to know. Clara sat still long after he left. The dog stayed beside her, watching the sky turn gold. For the first time since that church door slammed behind her, she didn't feel like a ghost. Maybe this wasn't a home, maybe it wasn't redemption, but it was a start. As night fell, she lay on the barn cot, the smell of hay and horses wrapping around her. The sound of crickets filled the air. Outside, Illy worked by lantern light, fixing a gate hinge. His shadow stretched long across the dirt. She watched from the open door, whispering to herself, maybe God didn't turn his face after all. The wind carried her words away, but Illy paused for just a second, like he'd heard. Then he kept working, silent, steady, and sure. And for the first time in her life, Clara Mee fell asleep not fearing the morning. The rooster crowed before dawn, its voice sharp against the fading dark. Clara Mee opened her eyes, blinking at the thin light seeping through the barn wall. The straw crackled beneath her as she sat up, every muscle stiff from the night's chill. The air smelled of hay, horses, and earth, strong, alive, nothing like the perfume, sour staleness of church pews and whispered pity. For the first time in a long while, she didn't wake to laughter, only quiet. And that quiet felt holy. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stood. Outside, she could hear the sound of boots crunching on gravel, a gate swinging open, and Illy's steady voice talking low to the cattle. She stepped to the barn door. The sky was blushing pale gold, the horizon melting into morning. Illy was already out there, sleeves rolled, hat low, moving through his chores with the rhythm of a man who didn't waste words or daylight. She hesitated, then stepped out, the cool dirt rough under her bare feet. Morning, she called softly. Illy glanced up, gave a small nod. You sleep? Some. He set down a feed sack. Good. Hunger'll catch up to you next. There's biscuits and coffee on the porch. Eat before it gets cold. She blinked, surprised. You made breakfast. He gave the faintest smirk. You think biscuits make themselves? For a second, she almost laughed, but she caught herself. He noticed anyway. Ain't a crime to smile, he said. Even out here. She turned toward the small house. The porch steps creaked beneath her feet, and a chipped enamel plate sat waiting. 2 biscuits, a tin cup of coffee still steaming, and a small jar of honey. It wasn't much, but to her it looked like a feast. She ate slow, careful, like she didn't want to waste the taste. Each bite warmed her from the inside. She hadn't eaten since before the wedding. Illy passed by once, leading a horse to water. He didn't say a word, just tipped his hat and kept walking. But she caught the faintest glance toward her plate, as if to make sure she was eating. When she finished, she carried the cup back to the well and rinsed it. Her reflection in the water startled her, hair tangled, eyes tired, dress torn. But beneath the ruin, something new had started to show. Resolve. Illy came up behind her, wiping his hands on a cloth. You look like you're fixin' to work, he said. She nodded. I can, I will. You gave me food and a place to rest. I won't just take and walk off like a stray. His eyes met hers, Steady, unreadable. You know cattle work. No, she admitted, but I learn fast. He studied her a long moment, then tossed her a pair of old gloves. Then you can start with the fences. Watch the wire. It bites worse than gossip. She caught the gloves, fumbling a little, and managed a faint smile. I'll remember that. The morning went slow and quiet. She worked near the far edge of the pasture, pulling weeds, straightening posts, tying wire with raw fingers. The sun climbed higher, burning through the last chill of dawn. Now and then, Illy's voice carried across the field, calling to a horse, whistling to the dog. She didn't need to look. She could tell where he was by the sound of his boots or the jingle of his tools. It was the kind of silence that didn't press down, it held her up. At noon, she wiped the sweat from her brow and sat under a tree. Her palms were red, her arms sore, but the ache felt good. Earned. Illy came over a while later, carrying a canteen and a slice of bread wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her without a word. You didn't have to, she said. Didn't say I did. They sat side by side, the dog sprawled between them, tail flicking lazily. The fields shimmered in heat, the windmill creaked in rhythm, and for a while there was nothing but quiet companionship. Clara turned the bread in her hands, then spoke softly. You ever been laughed out of a place? Illy didn't answer right away. World's got long memory for other folks' shame. He said finally, but it forgets kindness real quick. I stopped letting it bother me. She nodded slowly. Wish I could say the same. You will, he said. When work gets in your bones, you stop here, in the noise. They sat a while longer, sharing silence instead of stories. Then Illy stood, back to it. Storm's common tonight. Storm? She asked, glancing at the sky. It looked clear, blue, and endless. He squinted toward the west. You'll see. That evening, as the wind shifted and the first gray clouds gathered on the horizon, Clara understood. By sunset, the air turned heavy. By nightfall, the storm rolled across the plain, wild, growling, alive. She stood at the barn door, watching lightning tear open the sky. The horses stamped nervously, thunder rumbling like judgment. Illy was out there still, tightening ropes, checking shutters, soaked through and steady as stone. Mr. Illy, she called over the wind, you'll be struck out there. He looked up once, rain streaming off his hat brim. Get the lanterns ready, he shouted back. She rushed inside, lighting the lamps with trembling hands. The dog barked and pressed close to her legs. She prayed the roof would hold. Outside, thunder cracked again, and through it all, she could hear Illy's voice low, calm, commanding the storm like it might listen. Something inside her stirred then, not fear, not pity, but the faint, trembling pull of trust. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't a savior, but he was the first man who hadn't turned away. And as the rain roared against the roof, she whispered into the dark, maybe storms don't always come to destroy. Maybe sometimes they come to wash it all clean. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the land washed pale and trembling. Rainwater shimmered in puddles across the yard, catching the first blush of light like broken glass. The air smelled of wet earth, pine, and something softer, like the world had taken a deep breath and finally let it out. Clara Mee stepped outside barefoot, her skirt heavy with damp, hair undone from the night. The wind had softened to a whisper, carrying birdsong over the hills. Illy was by the corral, mending a section of broken fence. His sleeves were rolled, skin streaked with mud, movements steady. The storm hadn't shaken him, it had tested him. She stood watching him for a long time, unsure whether to speak. He noticed her there, eventually, and nodded toward the house. Coffee's on the stove, he said, made it strong, you'll need it. Her voice was hoarse. You didn't sleep. He didn't look up. Didn't have time for that. She turned, stepping back toward the porch, her feet leaving light prints in the wet dirt. The floorboards were slick but warm under the morning sun. Inside, the smell of coffee and rain filled the air. Two small faces peeked around the corner of the Hollily's daughters, the twins. They were quiet, pale, lied, clutching each other's hands. Clara froze, not wanting to scare them. "Morning," she said gently. "You too hungry?" They didn't answer, but one of them gave the smallest nod. Clara smiled. "Well, I think I saw some flour and eggs. Maybe we can make pancakes. That sound good." The younger girl whispered to the other, and both crept forward just enough to nod again. Their eyes darted to the table, then to her, shy but curious. Clara tied her hair back, rolled her sleeves, and set to work. The sound of whisking filled the kitchen. Soft, rhythmic, alive. Butter hissed on the skillet, and soon the air was warm with the smell of frying batter. The girls sat at the table, watching, whispering to each other in voices so light they almost vanished. When Clara slid the first pancake onto their plates, one of them whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." She paused. "You can call me Clara." The girl nodded. "Thank you, Miss Clara." Something in her chest ached, something gentle, unexpected. Illy stepped in a moment later, brushing off his hat. His eyes flicked from Clara to the girls, to the steaming plates on the table. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Clara glanced at him. They were hungry, and so was I. He nodded once, voice softening. "Smells better than I ever manage." She smiled faintly. "That's 'cause you probably burn it." He didn't deny it, just sat down, took a bite, and let out a low hum of approval. "Not bad, Miss Clara." The girls giggled, their laughter thin but real. Clara turned to see them smiling, their first smiles since she arrived, and for a heartbeat, the silence that haunted the house cracked open, letting in a little warmth. Later that afternoon, Clara walked to the wash line behind the house. The sky was clear again, clouds drifting lazy across the blue. She hung out wet sheets one by one, the white cloth snapping in the wind. Illy's dog trailed her steps, watching her move, head tilted. She reached down and scratched behind his ears. "You're the only one here who doesn't mind a stranger," she said softly. Illy's voice came from behind her. "He don't like strangers, just senses good hearts." She turned. "Then maybe he's got better sense than most folks." He leaned against the post, arms crossed. "You don't have to keep doing chores, you know. I didn't bring you here for that." "I know," she said. "But I need to. It keeps me from thinking too much." He studied her face, the quiet exhaustion, the way her hands never stayed still, always working. Finally, he nodded. "All right then, but if you're staying, you do it fair, not servants' work. You eat same as us, you rest same as us. You got that?" She looked down, touched by something she couldn't name. "Yes, sir." The wind lifted her hair, brushed across her cheek, and for a moment she thought she saw something soften in his eyes, something fragile, unguarded. That night, after supper, Clara found one of the girls crying in the corner room. She knelt down beside her, gentle. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" The little girl sniffled, clutching a small wooden horse. "Mama's smell's still in her room. I don't want it to go away." Clara's heart tightened. "You miss her, don't you?" She nodded hard, tears streaking her cheeks. Clara pulled her close, rocking her softly. "You don't have to let it go. You can miss her and still make new memories. That's what hearts do. They stretch." The child buried her face in Clara's dress, and after a while the sobs eased. When she looked up again, her eyes were red but calmer. "Will you sing, like you did in the barn?" Clara hesitated. "You heard that?" The girl nodded. So Clara began to hum, low and slow, the way her mama once did, an old lullaby from back east, sweet and cracked with time. Her voice filled the room like candlelight, and even but warm. Illy stood in the doorway, unseen for a while, his hand resting on the frame. His jaw was tight, eyes glistening in the dim glow. He didn't move until the song faded. Then he spoke quietly. That was her song. Clara turned, startled. "I didn't know." He nodded once. "You couldn't have. Just thank you." The little girl had already fallen asleep, curled against Clara's side. Illy stepped closer, kneeling to lift his daughter. His voice was rough. "They ain't slept this peaceful since she passed." Clara whispered, "I'm sorry, Illy." He shook his head. Don't be. You've brought a bit of peace back here, whether you meant to or not. She looked down, her hands clasped. I only wanted to help. He stood, holding his sleeping child close, eyes still on Clara. And you did. He turned toward the hall, pausing before the door. Good night, Miss Clara. She smiled softly. Good night. When he was gone, she sat there for a while in the quiet room, the lamp flickering low. Outside, the night wind brushed against the windows, carrying the scent of wet grass and new beginnings. And for the first time since the church, since the laughter, since the running, she didn't feel like a ghost of herself. She felt seen. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive like a sunrise. Sometimes it creeps in through the back door, on the smell of coffee and the sound of laughter that isn't supposed to exist anymore. By the time winter loosened its grip on Dustwell, the ranch had changed. The silence that once haunted every corner now breathed with soft noise, children's footsteps, the scrape of pans, the low hum of a woman singing while she worked. Clara Mee stood by the stove, apron dusted with flour, sunlight spilling through the kitchen window. The twins were perched on stools beside her, elbows deep in dough, faces streaked white with mischief. You sure this is how your papa makes cornbread? Clara teased, pretending to inspect their work. One of them giggled. Papa don't make cornbread, Miss Clara. He burns it. The other added proudly, we're better at it than him. Clara grinned. Then we better make enough to prove it. The laughter that followed was small but pure, echoing off the old beams like a hymn. Outside, Illy was in the yard fixing a loose gate hinge. He paused for a moment, hearing their laughter drift through the window. For the first time in months, it didn't ache. It eased something in him. He adjusted his hat and kept working, though a quiet smile tugged at his lips. When Clara stepped out later with a tray fresh cornbread, butter melting into golden crumbs, he looked up from the gate. Smells like heaven, he said, brushing his hands clean. It'll taste like hard work if you don't sit and eat, she replied, setting the tray on the porch rail. He sat down, taking a piece, still hot enough to sting his fingers. You didn't have to. Clara smiled faintly. I know, I wanted to. They ate in silence for a bit, the air filled with the sound of wind and cattle lowing in the field. The sun caught the dust rising from the road, turning it to gold. Illy glanced sideways. Girls seem lighter these days. Haven't seen them chase the chickens since, well, since before. Clara's voice softened. They just needed to feel safe again. He nodded, thoughtful. You've done more for em than anyone since their mama passed. I only gave them what I needed too. She said quietly, a place where no one's laughing. He looked at her then, long enough for her to feel it, but he didn't speak, just nodded once, slow and sure. Later that day, they worked the barn together. Illy repaired a harness, while Clara swept the hay, both lost in their rhythm. Outside, the wind whistled through the rafters, stirring up dust that glimmered like gold in the fading light. You ever ride? He asked suddenly, without looking up. Ride? Horses? You look like you'd rather walk than trust one. Clara laughed lightly. You're not wrong. Last time I got near a horse, it ran off before I even climbed the rail. Illy chuckled, a rare sound, low, quiet, real. Maybe it just didn't know what it was missin'. She smiled, cheeks warming. You're sayin' that horse had bad judgment. I'm sayin' it wasn't raised right. Their eyes met over the dim light filtering through the barn. For a heartbeat, neither looked away. Then Illy cleared his throat and went back to work. By sundown, the barn was swept. Tools hung neat, air heavy with the scent of straw and wood oil. Clara stood by the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron, watching the light fade across the fields. Illy joined her, leaning on the post beside her. You've been workin' too hard, he said quietly. It keeps me from rememberin' too much. He nodded. Work's good for that, but you can't just live in the ache. You gotta let the quiet mean somethin' too. She looked out at the horizon, where the sky bled orange into purple. Quiet used to scare me, felt like judgment. Now, I don't mind it so much. Illy's gaze softened. That's 'cause it's honest. Folks can fake words, but not silence. She smiled faintly. You talk like a preacher sometimes. He laughed under his breath. Don't insult me. That drew the first real laugh from her, a soft, broken sound that turned into something beautiful. The twins' voices called from the house, breaking the moment. Illy tipped his hat. Better see what trouble they're mackin'. She nodded, eyes still on the horizon. Go on. I'll finish here. He lingered for a moment before leaving, his boots fading into the distance. When the last light sank below the hills, Clara leaned against the doorway and closed her eyes. For the first time since she'd come west, she didn't feel like she was hiding from anything. For the first time, she belonged to a place that didn't ask her to shrink. The wind picked up, brushing her hair across her face, and she smiled to herself. Maybe home wasn't a place at all. Maybe it was the quiet between two people learning how to live again. The next morning, sunlight spilled over the porch, painting everything gold and soft. Clara Mee stood with a basket of laundry, her fingers brushing against damp sheets. The smell of fresh linen and wildflowers drifting through the open windows wrapped around her like a quiet hymn. The twins tumbled out of the house, squealing and chasing each other around the yard. One tripped over the dog, then laughed so hard she couldn't catch her breath. Clara smiled, brushing stray hair from her face. Illy appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, watching her with an expression that was steady, careful, almost shy. He didn't speak at first, just leaned against the doorframe, quiet as the morning. You're making them happy, he said finally. Clara looked up. They make me happy too. They've changed the house. He nodded. Good, place needed that, needed life back. She hesitated. You don't seem so alone either. Illy's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. Maybe not as much as I used to be. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of hay and earth. The twins ran past, squealing, dragging their arms full of wildflowers. Clara laughed and motioned for them to leave some for Illy. He bent down to take them, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. It wasn't much, but the contact sent a warmth up her arms she hadn't felt in years. Later, they worked on the fence together. Illy held a post steady while Clara hammered in nails. Their hands brushed again and again, each collision gentle, electric, unnoticed by the twins who played nearby. You've got a strong swing, Illy remarked, his voice quiet. Clara smiled faintly. And you've got steady hands, makes the work easier. For a moment, they simply stood there, hammer in hand, sun on their backs, two people learning the rhythm of shared labor, of mutual trust. By evening, the sky had turned a molten orange, and the smell of cooking stew drifted through the open windows. Clara set the table as the twins ran in to wash their hands. Illy carried firewood, stacking it neatly in the hearth. You don't have to do that, Clara said softly, noticing his careful placement of logs. I like to see the fire burn right. He replied, just like everything else. She glanced at him. You're particular about things. He gave her a crooked smile. You learn quick or it doesn't get done. The twins climbed onto their stools, settling in for dinner. Clara served the stew, steam curling from each bowl. The room smelled of potatoes, onions, and something homely she hadn't realized she missed so much. Illy ate in silence, eyes occasionally flicking to Clara. She noticed the subtle glances, the way his hand lingered on the edge of the table near hers. After the meal, Clara cleared the table while Illy helped the girls with their chores. For the first time, there was no awkwardness, no tension, just small, wordless acts that felt like the stitching together of a fragile family. When the chores were done, Clara washed the dishes while Illy leaned against the counter. You're good at this, he said quietly. I learn fast, she replied, meeting his gaze. A long silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken acknowledgement, the kind that builds quietly over shared effort. Illy finally nodded. I'll admit, I didn't expect it. Thought you'd be, well, fragile, timid. She wiped her hands, a soft laugh escaping. I've never been fragile, just underestimated. He smiled then, small but real, eyes crinkling at the corners. Seems you've got the right kind of stubbornness for this place. The twins came running in, demanding a bedtime story. Clara tucked them in, their small hands clutching her fingers as they whispered good night. Illy lingered in the doorway, watching her with something soft in his gaze. She didn't notice at first, lost in the rhythm of brushing hair and kissing foreheads. When she looked up, he was still there. She caught her breath. You should sleep, it's late. He nodded. I will, just wanted to see you with them. Clara's lips curved in a faint, warm smile. They like me. Seems more than that, he said quietly. She felt a blush rising, but didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to the twins, smoothing the blanket over them. That night, as she lay in the small spare room, Clara thought about the day, the quiet trust, the soft laughter, the brush of Illy's hand. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a shadow. She felt alive. Outside, the ranch settled into night, the wind whispering through the fields, the faint creak of the barn, the low murmur of the animals, the hush of the girls sleeping. These sounds were no longer lonely. They were home, and somewhere in the stillness Illy watched from the porch, hands clasped behind his back, letting the night hold what words could not. The morning air was thick and heavy, like it held its breath for something waiting to break. Clara Mee stepped onto the porch, feeling it, the first hint of the storm before it even arrived. The sky was bruised purple and gray, clouds rolling low, dark as spilled ink. The twins clung to her skirts, eyes wide. Miss Clara, is it going to rain? One whispered. She knelt, brushing a damp strand of hair from the girl's face. Maybe, but storms come and go. They can't last forever. Illy appeared behind them, boots crunching in the dirt. He'd been out in the fields early, checking the fences and the water troughs. His sleeves were rolled up, hat low, jaw set with that same quiet determination she'd come to trust. Storms common, he said without preamble. Rivers risen fast. Cattle need moved before it hits. Clara's stomach nodded. I can help, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. He studied her. I don't ask for help unless it's needed. I can do it. He paused, then nodded. Then grab your boots and gloves. We ride. The wind picked up, tugging at her dress and tossing the twins' hair across their faces. The dog barked nervously, pacing at the gate. Clara took a deep breath and followed Illy to the corral. By noon the storm had arrived, rolling across the valley like a living beast. Lightning tore open the sky, thunder following hard and close. The river churned, swollen and angry, froth and debris racing toward the low fields. Illy's voice cut over the wind. Cattle, round 'em up. Clara spurred her horse, heart hammering, trying to keep pace. The twins watched from the porch, small figures swallowed by the rain. She clenched the reins, focusing on the task, each shout and stamp of hooves echoing in her ears. A stray calf broke from the group, running toward the river. Without thinking, Clara galloped after it, the mud sucking at her boots. She reached it just in time, looping her arms around its neck, guiding it back to safety. Illy saw her, eyes wide, and rode closer. Careful, Clara, river's too close. She barely nodded, her arms straining against the animal. Rain plastered her hair to her face, soaked her dress through, added weight to her every movement. And then she saw it, a larger steer struggling in the flood's edge, water dragging at its legs. No, she muttered under her breath, but before she could think, she was there, grabbing the animal's halter, pulling with all her strength. The river slapped against her legs, icy and merciless. Illy was beside her in an instant, his hands gripping hers, muscles taut. Hold on, don't let go. The storm screamed around them, rain lashing, wind howling, the river threatening to swallow them whole. Clara's breath came in sharp gasps, teeth chattering, arms burning, but she didn't let go. She wouldn't. Not now. Finally, with one last heave, the steer stumbled to firm ground. Clara collapsed to her knees, soaked through, trembling from cold and adrenaline. Illy knelt beside her, pressing a rough hand to her back. "You all right?" She nodded weakly, voice barely a whisper. I think so." The dog barked happily, circling them both. Illy's daughters ran into the yard, soaked but safe, faces pale with fear yet alive. "You saved them," one cried. "You saved him," the other yelled, pointing at Clara. Illy looked at her, eyes storm, gray and fierce. "You've got more courage than anyone I've ever met." She shook her head, dripping wet. I just couldn't let them drown." He pulled her close, arms firm, sheltering her from the wind. "You saved more than cattle today. You saved me, saved my girls, you saved my heart." The storm raged on, but in that moment, the world outside didn't matter. Only the three of them, soaked and trembling, stood together, defiant against the chaos. By evening, the rain slowed to a heavy drizzle. The river had calmed, the cattle huddled in safe pastures. The twins clung to Clara, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. Illy led them back to the house, wrapping blankets around their shoulders. He glanced at Clara, saw the mud, the soaked dress, the bloodied fingers from rope burns. "You're a fool," he said quietly, voice low and rough. "A beautiful, stubborn fool." She laughed weakly, shivering. "Someone had to do it." He studied her for a long moment, eyes lingering. "And you did. God help me, you did." Inside, the fire crackled, steam rising from hot water and blankets laid out to dry. The twins drifted to sleep in Clara's arms, tired but safe. Clara sank into the chair beside the hearth, breathing hard. Illy knelt on the floor before her, drying her hands with a towel. "You're soaked to the bone," he said quietly. "You should rest." "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet." "You've earned the right to," he murmured. "Tomorrow we'll see about drying out that dress." She met his eyes, and for the first time there was no shame, no fear, only mutual respect, raw and unspoken. The storm outside had tested her body, her courage, and her resolve. But more than that, it had shifted something inside. The beginning of trust, the spark of unspoken connection, and the undeniable truth that she belonged here, in the wild, with him, with them. Outside, the night stretched quiet, the river settling, the wind softening, but inside the ranch house, something had changed forever. The storm had passed, but its wrath left scars across the valley. Trees lay toppled, fences twisted like broken bones, and the river still rumbled angrily, swollen with mud and debris. Clara Mee stepped out into the morning, soaked hair plastered to her face, boots caked in muck. Her dress, heavy with mud, dragged behind her as she moved through the yard. The twins followed, small and wide-eyed, clinging to each other, faces pale with fear and awe. Illy was already in the field, surveying the damage. His horse shifted nervously beside him. When he saw her, he didn't speak immediately. He only nodded, eyes dark, storm, gray, weighing her in a way that made her pulse quicken. "You shouldn't be out here," he said finally. "I couldn't just sit," she replied, voice tight. "The river, those cattle, someone had to." His jaw clenched. "You nearly drowned yesterday. You could have died." She swallowed, nodding. "And someone had to save you too, didn't they?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned, pointing toward the far pasture. A young calf teetered at the edge of the still raging river, water lapping at its legs. Another was caught in debris, panicked, bellowing. "Go," he shouted, voice carrying over the wind. "Help them?" Clara didn't hesitate. She raced through mud and broken fence posts, arms wrapped around the animals, hauling them toward safety. The river roared beside her, water threatening to pull her under. Her strength faltered, but her will didn't. She would not fail, not this time. Illy was at her side in a heartbeat, muscles straining, hands gripping hers to steady both the animals and her. Together, they dragged the calves onto solid ground. Her dress clung like armor, heavy and wet. but she kept moving, kept pulling, kept fighting. The twins watched from the porch, shouting encouragement. Their voices were small against the roar of the storm, but somehow Clara drew strength from them, from their hope, from the trust in her eyes. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last calf stumbled to safety. Clara collapsed to her knees, water dripping from her hair, chest heaving. Illy knelt beside her, placing a rough, steady hand on her back. "You all right?" he asked, voice low, rough with relief. I think so," she whispered. The dog barked and circled them, joyous and frantic. The twins ran out, muddy and soaking wet, clinging to her arms, their laughter a fragile triumph against the chaos. "You saved them all," one cried. "You're amazing," the other shouted. Illy's eyes were on Clara, storm, gray and intense. "You've got more courage than anyone I've ever met," he said, voice breaking just enough to be real. She shook her head. I couldn't let them drown." He pressed her to his chest for the briefest moment, unspoken words hanging between them. "You've saved more than the cattle, Clara. You've saved my heart." The storm outside had tested bodies, minds, and spirits. But inside that field, soaked and trembling, something greater had been forged. Trust, respect, and a quiet recognition that she was more than anyone had ever believed. By evening, the sun broke through, turning puddles into molten gold. The ranch bore the marks of the flood, broken fences, scattered tools, mud in every corner. But life had endured. Clara and Illy moved among the cattle, checking on each one, their hands brushing occasionally, unspoken acknowledgement in each touch. The twins clung to Clara, exhausted but safe, their faces streaked with mud and tears. "You're reckless," Illy said, voice low, almost a growl. "I had to," she replied simply. He studied her, eyes softening. "And I underestimated you." Clara wiped mud from her hands, letting a small smile break. "Most people do." Illy's lips twitched into a rare smile. "Not me, not anymore." Inside the house, the fire crackled, steam rising from drying clothes. Clara's dress dripped into the sink as she wrung it out, shoulders stiff, fingers raw. Illy handed her a towel, standing close but letting her the space she needed. "You're soaked to the bone," he said quietly. "You need rest." "I can't," she whispered. "There's still work to do." He shook his head, voice soft. "Tomorrow, we'll see about drying that dress. Tonight, you rest. You've earned it. God help me, you've earned more than that." She met his gaze, heart hammering, and in that look, everything unspoken between them was laid bare. Respect, trust, and a bond that had been forged in rain, mud, and courage. Outside, the night settled, the river quieting to a murmur. But inside the ranch, the warmth of fire and trust blossomed. Clara Mee, the girl once mocked and scorned, had proven herself in the fiercest of storms, and Illy knew, without a doubt, that she was no longer an outsider. The morning air in Dustwell hung heavy, tense with expectation. Clara Mee stepped off the wagon, the sound of her boots on the dirt street echoing unnervingly. Townsfolk lingered in doorways and at windows, whispering behind hands, eyes sharp with judgment. The church that had once witnessed her humiliation stood tall and stern at the center of town, its bell tower cutting the sky like a silent judge. She gripped the edge of her shawl, heart hammering. The twins clung to her sides, their small hands trembling in hers. Illy rode beside them, silent, steely, his hat low, eyes scanning the crowd, jaw set with determination. When he saw her flinch at the stairs, he reached out, brushing her shoulder. "We face them together," he murmured. "Whatever comes, we face it." Clara nodded, swallowing hard. I can do this." The doors of the church creaked open. The same congregation that had once mocked her now turned to watch her approach. Whispers rose, like dry leaves skittering across the street. The minister, stooped and solemn, stepped forward, lips tight. Beside him, the elders murmured to each other, eyes fixed. Even the man who had been her would-be groom avoided looking directly at her. She walked past them, chest rising and falling, keeping her gaze steady. Her dress was simple, linen and modest, but it bore the weight of her dignity. She felt eyes on her size, her shape, the woman she had been, and the woman she had become. Illy dismounted, standing by her side, his presence steady and protective. The twins peeked from behind her, small, anxious, yet curious. The minister's voice broke the silence. "Clara me, you stand here before us." Clara raised her chin, voice firm despite the tremor inside. "Yes, sir, I stand." An elder stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "And yet, the talk is that you are here, improperly, that your relationship with Illy Carter is." Illy's voice cut through, low and unwavering. "Improper? You call the woman who saved my life, my daughter's lives, improper?" The congregation murmured, shifting uneasily. Clara's hands tightened on the twins' shoulders. "I am not here for your approval," she said, voice steady. "I am here to stand beside the man who gave me, and my girls, a chance to belong. I am here because I am not afraid of truth." The minister's lips pressed into a thin line. "Many in this town say it is not fitting, that it is scandalous." Illy stepped forward, tone unwavering. "I'd rather stand beside the woman who saved my soul than kneel with those who mock God's creation." A hush fell. Even the elders stared, mouths tight. The man who had once scorned her shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Clara Mee held her head high. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She simply breathed in the moment, the first time she had felt herself fully, seen not as a body to be mocked, but as a woman of courage and conviction. The twins peeked up at her, eyes wide, silently cheering. She smiled faintly, the weight of fear falling from her shoulders. Illy's hand brushed hers lightly, fingers pressing in quiet solidarity. She felt the unspoken promise in that touch, protection, trust, and recognition. A townsperson whispered, "Too late, she is brave." Clara did not answer. She let silence speak. The morning stretched, the congregation shifted, the murmur of tongues turning to uneasy quiet. Eyes that had once mocked now lingered, caught between shame and astonishment. The minister sighed, lowering his gaze. The words he would have spoken were caught in the throat of propriety and witness. Clara Mee, the girl who had fled the church barefoot months before, now stood fully in the light. She did not need forgiveness. She needed no approval. She was seen. And for the first time in the town that had once shamed her, there was a stillness, an acknowledgment, however grudging, that courage and virtue could not be silenced. Illy's voice broke her reverie. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go home." She glanced at the twins, then at the congregation. "Yes," she said quietly. The church doors closed behind them, echoing into a silence heavier than any laughter had ever been. The church doors were shut behind them, but the whispers didn't stop. Outside, the townsfolk lingered, staring as Clara Mee walked beside Illy, the twins clinging to her skirts. Every step was measured, deliberate, a testament to the woman she had become. She no longer flinched at the stairs, no longer shrank to hide. Illy's hand brushed hers once, lightly, grounding her in the strength between them. "They'll have to reckon with truth," he said softly. She nodded. "And I won't be the one to let them forget it." The next morning, word spread through Dustwell like wildfire. The townspeople who had once mocked her now whispered in awe. Some averted their gaze. Others, guilty or humbled, hung their heads. At the church, the elders called a meeting. They summoned Illy first, demanding explanation, justification, and decorum. When he arrived, Clara stood beside him, calm and unwavering. "You're bringing her here?" one elder asked sharply, eyes narrowing. Illy's gaze did not falter. "Yes. She stands beside me because she saved my life, my daughter's lives, and she saved my heart." Gasps rippled through the small gathering. The minister's lips pressed together. The groom who had once laughed at Clara's sighs looked down, embarrassed, shifting uncomfortably. Clara Mee stepped forward, shoulders straight, voice steady. "I am not here to argue or beg. I am here to show that a person's worth is not measured by size, nor by your judgment, nor by your shallow opinions. I am here because courage, honesty, and love define a person, not the whispers of a small town." The room fell into stunned silence. Illy reached for her hand, holding it lightly. "I've told you before, and I'll say it again. I'd rather stand with Clara Mee, this woman who faced storms, fear, and judgment, than bow to the petty pride of those who think themselves righteous. You can cast stones, whisper, or judge, but it changes nothing." Even the minister shifted uncomfortably, the weight of their words pressing against him. Clara looked at the congregation, eyes soft but unyielding. "I came here not for revenge, but to claim dignity, and in doing so, I claim a place beside the man who has shown me kindness, protection, and respect. That is my truth. That is my stand." A quiet ripple of acknowledgment passed through the room. Some heads bowed in shame, some eyes glistened with unspoken admiration. The man who had once scorned her avoided her gaze, shrinking under the weight of truth he could no longer deny. Illy's daughters peeked around the corner, shy but watching. Clara bent slightly toward them. "See," she whispered, "we don't let others define us." The twins nodded, small hands gripping hers, absorbing the lesson in courage, in dignity, in standing tall despite cruelty. Illy squeezed her hand, and she felt the warmth of unwavering support, the quiet bond forged through storms, literal and metaphorical. The elders, once harsh and rigid, began to step back, unsure what to say. Even the minister lowered his gaze, acknowledging silently that she had risen above their judgment. Clara Mee did not speak further. She did not need to. The silence she held was heavier than any accusation, louder than any mockery. It was proof that strength, bravery, and moral truth could not be broken. Outside, the sun broke through clouds, warm and steady. It bathed the church and the square in gold light, illuminating a woman who had endured, who had persevered, and who now walked with her head held high. Illy's voice was low, tender, carrying just enough pride to reach her heart. "You've shown them all what it means to be brave, what it means to be worth something, truly worth something." Clara smiled faintly, a smile born of endurance, of vindication, of quiet triumph. "And I've learned, it's not about them, it's about knowing who you are." The twins ran to her side, clinging to her once more, laughing despite the weight of the past. She hugged them close, feeling the warmth of family, trust, and belonging. Dustwell would whisper, Dustwell would judge, but Clara Mee had already risen above it. She had claimed her place, not through vengeance, but through unwavering courage, steadfast love, and the undeniable proof of her heart. And for the first time she did not flinch, she did not shrink. She was seen, she was respected, and she was free. The sun rose over the horizon like liquid gold, spilling warmth across the rolling fields of Illy Carter's ranch. Clara Mee stepped onto the porch, breath catching at the soft light. The twins were already up, chattering excitedly as they arranged wildflowers in small mason jars. Their laughter rippled across the yard, a melody she had come to treasure. Illy stood near the barn, dressed in his Sunday best, hands folded behind his back. He watched the girls carefully, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, eyes storm, gray and soft in the morning light. Clara paused, letting the quiet settle around her. For months, they had built this life together, brick by brick, stitch by stitch. Every laugh, every storm survived. Every small act of courage had led to this morning. The twins ran to her, tugging at her skirts. "Mama, come see," one cried. She knelt beside them, inspecting the jars filled with wildflowers, colors bursting against the wood of the porch. "They're perfect," she whispered, brushing a stray curl from her face. Illy approached, boots soft on the porch boards. He knelt, taking one of the girl's hands in his. "Your mother has a gift for making even the smallest things beautiful," he said gently. The girl beamed, pride shining in her eyes. The other twin handed him a flower, and he accepted it with a laugh, tucking it into his lapel. Clara's heart swelled, a quiet, unshakable warmth that reached through her entire being. This was home. This was peace. Later, the carriage from the town church arrived, dusted wheels glinting in the morning sun. Clara's pulse quickened, a mix of anticipation and serenity. This church, once a place of mockery and shame, was now a sanctuary of affirmation and blessing. Illy took her hands, fingers intertwining, grounding them both. "Ready?" he asked softly, voice low, tender. Clara nodded. Yes. They walked together toward the carriage, twins trailing close behind, small hands grasping hers. Townsfolk lined the path, eyes wide, whispers hushed, reverent. No laughter, no scorn, only recognition of the woman who had endured, who had risen, who had become something undeniable. The church doors opened, welcoming them with sunlight spilling through stained glass. The scent of candles and polished wood filled the air. Clara inhaled deeply, steadying herself. She had walked this path barefoot months before, fleeing humiliation. Now she walked it with dignity, with purpose, with love. The minister greeted them, eyes softening as he took in the sight of Clara and Illy together, the twins by their side. He gave a small nod, a silent blessing of acknowledgement. Clara's dress was simple, linen and elegant, flowing softly as she stepped forward. She felt every glance, every unspoken thought, but this time it did not break her, it strengthened her. Illy's hand was warm in hers, steady and sure. "You were never less," he whispered, voice gentle. "Only waiting for someone to see you right." Her lips curved into a small, serene smile. She drew in a deep breath, letting the moment stretch, letting the past fall away, letting the present hold her fully. The twins reached up to hold her hands, their small faces shining with joy and trust. She bent slightly, brushing their hair back, whispering, "We did it, together." And as the sun rose higher, spilling gold across the aisle and lighting every eye, Clara Mee took her place, no longer the girl they mocked, no longer the outsider, no longer defined by judgment. She was whole. She was radiant. She was seen. The congregation waited in quiet reverence as the first words of the ceremony were spoken, carrying with them the weight of endurance, courage, and love that had been earned, not given. Illy squeezed her hand gently, and she felt the promise of every tomorrow stretching ahead, bright and unbroken. The church was bathed in the golden light of morning, stained glass painting the walls with colors like fire and hope. Clara Mee stepped forward, hand in hand with Illy, the twins trailing at her sides. The congregation's whispers had faded into a respectful hush, a silent acknowledgement of the woman who had endured every storm and emerged stronger. She breathed deeply, chest rising and falling, feeling the warmth of the moment settle over her like a cloak. This was the life she had fought for, the dignity she had claimed, not with words or anger, but with courage, patience, and unwavering love. Illy's eyes met hers, storm, gray and steady, full of a quiet reverence that made her heart swell. "You're ready," he whispered, voice low, almost sacred. "I am," she replied, voice steady, full of the strength earned over months of trials and storms. The minister began the ceremony, words flowing gentle and solemn. Clara's gaze swept over the room, faces once mocking, now softened with awe and respect. She smiled faintly, feeling the weight of every past humiliation dissolve. The twins clung to her hands, eyes wide and shining. She knelt slightly, brushing their hair back. "We've made it," she whispered, "all of us." Illy took a step closer, raising her hands to his lips, brushing them with a reverent tenderness. "Clara Mee," he said, voice husky with emotion, "you were never less than anyone. You were waiting for someone to see you right, and I see you truly." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of triumph, of love, of completion. She squeezed his hands. "I see you too," she whispered, "and I always will." The vows were exchanged, each word carrying the weight of their journey. The storms endured, the nights of fear, the moments of doubt, and the unwavering courage that had brought them here. Clara Mee's voice rang clear and steady. I promise to stand by you, to love and protect, to be a home for you and the girls, and to honor the life we've built together. Illy's reply was equally heartfelt. I promise to cherish you, to respect your strength, to protect you and our family, and to honor the woman you are always. The twins squealed softly, clinging to both of them as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. The sound of the church bell echoed through the valley, ringing a new beginning. Outside, the sun shone brighter, painting the ranch and fields in gold. Clara Mee stepped down from the altar, hand in hand with Illy, feeling the warmth of their new life envelop her. The townsfolk, some with bowed heads, some with hesitant smiles, watched silently. There were no words of mockery, no sneers, only recognition, subtle but profound. She had stood, she had endured, and she had triumphed. The twins ran ahead, scattering wildflowers across the yard, laughter filling the morning. Clara followed, barefoot now on soft grass, feeling alive, whole, and free. Illy caught her hand as she reached him, fingers intertwining, and for the first time in months, she felt nothing but peace. Their eyes met, and the unspoken understanding was complete. Love had not only endured, it had flourished. Clara looked around the ranch, at the fields, the animals, the house that had once echoed with silence, and finally at the man who had never doubted her worth. She whispered softly, almost to herself, They mocked what they saw, but the Lord built me to endure. Illy pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, eyes soft with adoration. And I will see you endure, grow, and shine for all our days. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, the laughter of children, and the promise of tomorrow across the golden fields. The girl they had mocked had become the woman the West remembered.